All right, guys, welcome back to another Canada Immigration Live Q&A. Today, I am not alone. No, I'm not. I have my guest, Alicia. She's with me. So welcome. And wow, there's been a few changes since we last did our live Q&A last week, one of which is quite frustrating for me. And that is the whole out of status construction worker program that was recently announced by this fellow right here, Minister Miller. And lately, Alicia, I've been a little, I don't know, just, I'm trying to say something nice here. A little frustrated by some of the decisions that are coming out, including the continuance of large French draws, and then now this program to facilitate construction workers that are out of status, which in principle, I understand kind of where they're coming from. But in practice, when you look at the reality of the world right now, when they're trying to get 2 million people out or whatever the number is in the next few years, the concept of then basically taking people who have chosen to fall out of status, who have chosen to remain in Canada, and then giving them essentially amnesty is just a massive incentive for other people to also do that. But I covered this at length in my I wanted to do it my own because I didn't want to, Alicia to be pulled into my own views here. But last Friday, I think it was, I did that special episode on this topic the moment it was released, which usually they do quietly. The minister, these types of more controversial things are released on Fridays, when everybody is, basically getting ready to enjoy their weekend, then it comes out. And so I just recommend that everybody go back and maybe I can pull it up and I can show you what I'm referring to here. But if you go to our the YouTube channel here, let me adjust this. Hey, there's us, Alicia. We are live. But if you go to the YouTube channel and you go to the live section here, you'll see I did this one new PR program out of status construction workers. And I had a few little thoughts there 4 days ago on this that I encourage you to go check out. But yeah, change
Mark,
is constant.
you also did a nice blog article, and so on the blog you've got that as well, and that outlines, some of your beefs with how they're implementing that program and what the possible ramifications are. But I guess there's always winners and losers, and I guess,
Mm-hmm.
if you do happen to be an out-of-status construction worker and you fit the parameters of the program, then this might be a lifeline. So yeah, policy-wise, there are definitely some concerns about this. But it is another tool, right? So if you
Yes.
are in this situation, go and do your research, learn what it's about, see if you qualify, because it's hard, because Canada does need construction workers and we need new
Mm-hmm.
houses and we need to have buildings. So we can definitely talk about the policy, but we also want to tell people what the pathways are. So
Yeah,
we're trying to do both.
absolutely. Yes, we are. And I want to pull something up here on the actual live that I want to share. So one interesting aspect of this was there was a guest who just joined me spontaneously. That's one thing I can do with these lives. If someone wants to come join me, they can just come right on. And so this fellow right here, Miguel, I think is his name, he is actually a construction worker in Toronto who's a permanent resident, who was describing his situation with him and his fellow colleagues, where they all were out of work because the building just wasn't happening. And he offered some really good insight. And it started kind of at about, when I was ready to wrap it up, a little after the hour mark, about 1:07, 1 hour, 7 minute mark. He shared some great insight. And Miguel was supposed to send me a little message so that I could do a special live and bring him and some of his friends on to talk and about their experience. But it definitely kind of ran counter to what Minister Miller was saying about the need for construction workers, Alicia. And so this is always a challenge when you have overarching kind of policy decisions that are designed to help not just now but long term, and then people right on the ground who are experiencing different things. And so it was very fortuitous for him to be there, and he was very well spoken and really explained his his side of the story quite well. So if you're out there, Miguel, I'd love to hear from you.
Mhm.
Okay. I don't know. Anything else, Alicia, that we should bring up?
Yeah, they did actually also update the details on the, well, not the details, but the general way they're going on the parents and grandparents program for 2025.
Mm,
And again,
yeah.
that's not really good news. It might be really good news if you happened to 5 years ago put in your notification of interest and you had your interest to sponsor form submitted for your parent or grandparent. But again, literally, they are not accepting any new interest to sponsor forms. They are going back to the pool that was in there from 2020. So 5 years ago, everybody. And only the people who were Canadians who were making enough money to support themselves plus their family unit plus their parent or grandparent are eligible, and they have to maintain that financial sufficiency the entire time. There were a few um, little relaxation of the rules for COVID years, but other than that, it's still LECO plus 30% for a number of family members, and so that's going to be really tricky. And I'm assuming that that pool is substantially smaller than it seems to be because I'm guessing that some people just can't show that they meet the
Mhm.
income requirements anymore all the way back to 2020.
Yeah, and that's the interesting part, Alicia, too, is that, they've been pulling people from 2020 where this is year 5. And I would have thought at the rate to which they pulled and the total numbers that were in the pool, that they would have flushed that pool out already. One thing we do know, like you've alluded to, is that many people that were in that pool either didn't qualify to start with or right now are not able to qualify for a number of reasons. And remember, even parents and grandparents, when they go through this program, they have to be healthy. So they
Mm-hmm.
have to have health. And if their health deteriorated in that time, or maybe some of them unfortunately even passed away before they had a chance to be sponsored, that all affects the numbers, that are available ultimately for sponsorship. But yeah, I think a lot of people were kind of frustrated. I honestly thought they flushed it out last year. And I wish they would be more transparent as to how many people are actually in the pool. But that's, as you can see here, they're talking about accepting 10,000 applications, which is really one of the so the lowest number to date within this program. Change. It's always cruising. All right, everybody. If this is your first time watching the live Q&A, welcome. Alicia and I do this every Wednesday at 10 a.m. roughly. Once again, sorry, we were recording another episode of the Canadian Immigration Podcast. We're in the process of spinning out a number of episodes on our Express Entry Getting It Right series. And now more than ever before, do you need to get it right the first time? You can't rely on, getting it sent back and then just going back into the pool and getting another ITA. The competition is fierce. Your work permits are expiring. This may be your only opportunity. And so for many of you, you will only get one chance to get it right. So that is part of the reason that we are doing this series. Also, as a part of that, you can see here, all of these episodes are sponsored by the Express Entry Accelerator. And that course was specifically designed to help you DIYers out there navigate your way through without getting your application returned as being incomplete or refused because of a mistake. So the Getting It Right series is kind of designed to give you those essential tips on the most important areas that we see people fail on, and to just point you to the course so you know that it's there to assist you and help you. And of course, Alicia and I, we do this to build, I guess to some extent, awareness of the fact that Holthe Immigration Law is an immigration law firm that's here to help you and assist you. So keep that in mind. Now, if once again it's your first time, we don't answer every question that's posted. If you ask a question that says, should I do this? Or how do I qualify for immigration? Those are really specific questions that we are reserving and should really be directed to a consultation so we can get the information we need. But the questions that are of general importance to the vast number of people that are watching this live and the thousands that will watch it as a recording, those are the ones I select. So sometimes people will say, well, Mark, you're not answering my question. And so they continue to post the question over and over. That's not going to get your question answered. So there's a reason that I will often bypass it. And sometimes you'll ask a question that we just don't have an answer for. And so I won't bring it up if we don't have a good answer for it. Now that's not as rare, that's more rare, but it's a reality. So if you hear that little triangle ding, that just basically means it's a specific question, and we encourage you to slide over to our firm website over here. And no matter what page you're on, you'll be able to see this link that says speak to a lawyer, and then you can book a consultation. If you have any questions about what we do, just check out the Google reviews. And our our clients have been kind enough to leave a number of reviews for us there, and you can just get a feel for other people's experiences when they retain us. And I can tell you, I've never been more busy doing consultations for people in my entire practice. And so we've devoted a lot of time within our calendars to be able to meet with you. I've opened up large swaths of sections, and basically I'm increasing the consultations and I'm expanding work hours. So sometimes I have to work a little bit later to make sure we're getting applications out for clients, but we're really trying to be there for you during this crazy time. And I guess one other thing I'll point out too, for those of you who are new, within our, if I go back here to our firm website, you will see here that not only do we have the blog, but we have our podcast, which is available on Apple and Spotify. And when you go to wherever you're watching your podcast and you subscribe to it, you will see here that we have 2 series that I want to point you to. One, I've alluded to, the Express Entry Getting It Right. We're going to have 2 new episodes that are going to drop today. One is related to the construction workers, and the other is settlement funds, which Alicia and I actually recorded last week. Those are going to drop today. And then Alicia and I just finished recording one on reference letters. So that's our Express Entry Getting It Right series. And then we have another series before that was all on the Time's Up series, which is focused to all of you that are basically running out of time, work permits expiring, and we cover a variety of different topics. One thing I do want to point out, Alicia, is that I think it was about a month ago, someone had highlighted actually this one on Reddit, someone had highlighted the podcast that we did on, let's just see here. Let's see. Oh, this one here, all the way back to October, episode 150 on the high cost of staying in Canada illegally. Someone had posted it in Reddit, and it had a bunch of different comments, and it really had a lot of traction. And this is all Alicia and I discussing why you don't want to choose to stay in Canada illegally. Well, someone mentioned, well, Minister Miller he's got an amnesty program that's coming. And I said, that is not likely at all. Not likely at all. And then what happens? Well, the minister drops this construction worker pilot, which is a very, very narrow stream. But still, like, we don't know. The previous construction worker pilot required the person to be out of status for 5 years, I think, in Canada. And so people just, so someone said, well, what was the comment? Someone sent me an email that said, well, that comment got old quickly or something like that. Or I bet you regret making that comment that he wasn't going to do that. And in fact, I was very surprised that they did do this. But it just goes to show that, nothing is impossible for sure. But notwithstanding that, it's not an incentive, you guys, to choose to stay illegally and then just get a construction job in hopes that your life will be better. And I talked about it in my video. And I think it bears some value just to bring it up again and just to kind of direct you guys back to watch the episode. But in this episode that I did, it was kind of a monologue a little bit, but there were a few sections in here when I was specifically talking about some previous experiences I had. Because as a kid, I worked on a farm. We had a farm. Me and my brother ran a construction company building grain bins before I went to Portugal to serve a mission for my church. And during that time, construction can be tough for sure. But when I went to Portugal, there were a lot of African workers from Mozambique and Angola and Guinea-Bissau who were there. And they were some of my best friends. And it was just heart-wrenching, even then, as a naive little 19, 20-year-old, to see what was happening to them and how they had no protections because they didn't really have, well, they had status in Portugal because of the fact that those countries were at one point in time protectorates or they were colonized by Portugal years ago. And then they'd be given their freedom. But these people were able to come and work. And so they came, but often they'd come, they wouldn't be paid. They lived in horrible conditions and, they'd work for, literally a month or two. And then the owner of the construction project would abscond with the money and bolt to France. And I talked about that in my, in the YouTube video that I did just a few days back. So I encourage you to go back and watch that. But those are some of the concerns that I have with all of you as you're seeing your work permits expiring and not knowing what to do and trying to determine, well, should I stay? because people are talking about all kinds of crazy stuff like sharing social insurance numbers and all these different ways you can stay in Canada and work, without authorization. Well, all of those things, they are no future for you. And you're not only are you breaking the law, but you're subjecting yourself to whatever that crooked employer is who's willing to hire you. So
Well,
I'll leave it at
okay.
that. Alicia, up to you. I know I've been rambling here crazy, but
So also, and I mean, we can't divulge anything where you can identify anyone, but I've also had consults with people who were advised by shady consultants to do all sorts of things. And, these consultants are charging tens of thousands of dollars to try to say, oh, well, your last chance is to do this, and here's what you should say in your refugee claim, and I will, get you this type of visitor extension, or they're somehow selling also that if you file a refugee claim, you get a work permit. But understand, and we talk about this in this podcast episode as well, that work permit is only because you've made that refugee claim. And as soon as you make a refugee claim, they take away your passport and you have a removal order that is just waiting to come into effect, right? And so this is not a way to get a work permit. This is going to foreclose all of your options for economic permanent residency. And a lot of these consultants are telling people this won't affect your family. That is completely false. As soon as somebody makes a refugee claim, it affects all of their family members because a flag is put on their file and immigration knows instantly, oh, yeah, your sibling or your parent or your somehow relative made a refugee claim. You know what? That's going to reflect upon you and all your family members whenever they try to go and extend their work permit or get their postgrad work permit or apply to extend their visa. So be super, super careful. And if you have anybody, a consultant or anybody who's advising you to misrepresent or counseling you to lie, report them and run the other direction and get them off your file, right? Like make sure that they are not your consultant. If they're ghosting that application for you, get back control of your own application because then you have no idea what's been submitted in your application, and the likelihood of immigration being able to come after you for misrepresentation and bar you for 5 years is quite high. So be super careful.
indeed. Well, as always, we appreciate all that you guys do to support the channel, and we've got some frequent visitors like Spider-Man here, and we love your ideas for topics and suggestions to get our message out to more places. And Spider-Man says, "Why don't you put all the podcasts on YouTube?" And you know what? That makes a lot of sense. And in fact, that's what we're actually trying to do right now. So the majority of our podcasts that relate to our Times Up series and our Express Entry Getting It Right series, those are all now YouTube videos as well. So we do those in concert. So that's a great tip. Thank you so much. I also wanted to, just focus here initially on this next super chat that comes from Tamgi. And he says, I received a COPR with CEC. And this is something we see sometimes, mistakes. My city of destination says Vancouver. Can I fly to Edmonton as my final destination? The route is Europe, Vancouver, Edmonton connecting flight. So one of the things we don't have here, Tamga, is whether or not it was a PNP nomination. So we will assume that the nomination did not apply, like there was no nomination, but that it was just a regular CEC application. And in that case, Alicia, what are your thoughts on indicating that you were going to Vancouver in the EAPR application, but ultimately you decide you're going to settle in Edmonton?
Yeah, and as long as it's not a PNP, as long as you don't have any requirement to have an intent to reside in a certain province, and as long as it's not Quebec, right? Any province or territory other than Quebec, then you should be okay for express entry. You'll just want to notify the officer, hey, my EAPR said this, I've changed my mind, I want to eventually settle in Edmonton instead. Um, it should not hopefully be an issue unless there is a PNP element.
Perfect. All right, we've got a lot of really good express entry questions. This one's from Anuba. It says, under work history, express entry, if someone works remotely from one province while the employer is located in another, should they provide their own address or the employer's address in the employer address section? This is a great one. I'll give you some applause there. And Alicia, the answer to this also works for study history as well. So do you want to tackle that one?
Hmm. So, anyway, you've got to make it clear somehow, either in your combination of your address history and your work history, where you physically are and where the employer is. And you probably need to write this in your letter of explanation. So sometimes I've had clients say remote work, and then they'll say where they were working. But it is important when you're going back and looking at, and I'm hoping that this is Canadian provinces. It looks like it's Canadian work experience. Sometimes this gets complicated if you're dealing with foreign work experience, because then there's police certificate ramifications as well. But if you're talking about work inside of Canada, as long as it's not Quebec, then you can be working in any province and show an intent to reside in any province other than Quebec. You do want to be clear, where were you physically, and then where is the employer, and making sure that that employer is properly authorized to be performing or hire you for the work that you're performing for the NOC that you're claiming.
All right, Annie here, and we had other questions, so I'm bundling these together. Says, when can we expect the next CEC draw before LMIA removal? So one thing we know is that Minister Miller here has indicated their intention to remove all of the job offer points within express entry. That has not yet become a reality. So although it was announced a few months back, people can still claim those extra 50 or 200 points respectively for their job offer if it meets the requirements. So Alicia, when can we expect the next draw? We have to pull up this, and this one is a moving a crystal ball now. There we go. So after we look deeply into the crystal ball, I'm looking deeply into it. What do you think will be the next CEC draw? Because, well, let's take a look and let's look at our rounds of invitations. We'll slide over here. And the last one that we had, of course, was French. I'll just bypass that because I just don't want to. Oh, I'll backtrack a little bit here. Sorry. I'm going to skip past that without making any comments right at this time because I'll get on a tangent. But the last CEC was February the 5th, over a month ago, and it was a fairly large one. When will the next one happen, Alicia? Let's remove our crystal ball here.
I would hope it's the next one. And I know you'd go on a tangent, Mark, but I was listening to the editorial board of the Globe and Mail, and they actually had a piece on immigration, and their criticism from the editorial board of the Globe and Mail was, hey, you've messed around with express entry points to such an extent that things are getting heavily skewed for winners and losers, and one of them is French. And when you do that, you have a way lower CRS for these specialized categories for targeted occupations, and that's skewing your overall kind of human capital in terms of people that might be the most nimble to try to land on their feet in Canada. So they are against this as well. They said, go back
Yeah.
to the old system, have a straightforward across the board. Everybody knows what the points are. You don't have all these like bonus points that are heavily skewing the human capital points. So this is what the editorial board of the Globe and Mail was saying in terms of what they would recommend to change or amend in express entry particularly. So is there going to be another CEC draw? Probably, because the immigration has said that they want to have 40% of their applicants coming from inside Canada. And when they do these super large French draws, it means that a lot of people don't have to have Canadian high skilled work experience for at least a year and qualify for CEC, because if they just have foreign work experience and they have NCLC 7 in all their French exams, then they're probably able, with those bonus points, the 50 bonus points for French, they're probably able to get an ITA under a French category specific. And they just did two really big draws, right? We've just had about 10,000 people come in under those French category specific. And hopefully, to balance that out, they're going to do a CEC draw relatively soon.
Yeah. And one thing I do want to point out too, because there was one of the consultants who's also on X. He's got lots of opinions on the world. He said, "Hey, this is better than job offers being skewed by people who are committing fraud to get them." And I said, "Okay, well that's fine." And and I don't have an issue with encouraging francophone candidates to leave Quebec and come and live in other parts of Canada. I don't have any issues with that. But the problem I have with this is, Alicia, it's not just even the 50 points. So not only are they a French only draw, which excludes everyone else, but if you look at the criteria here, you'll notice that we also have here in the core human capital factors, we have official language proficiency. And so if they actually speak French at a high level, you can see if we go down to the languages, go a little bit further, you get points for your official first language, but there's also up to 22 if you're married or common law, and 24 points if you have a CLB 9 or higher in French. So that means not only do you have 24 points, but if we go down here to the breakdown of the additional points, you have that top French, you have an additional 74 points. And personally, I think that's where I think really it's just become political, and I think that's probably the reason more than any is to seeing the consequence to other applicants like Annie here, who is just hoping that there's going to be another CEC draw in a range that Annie will be able to qualify before Minister Miller removes those available points. So just my thoughts, and I'm sure others have other views on the world, but it's a little bit concerning, and I'm disappointed at how political it's become. With that being said, Melcan says, what's the lowest points for French draw in express entry this year so far, and which level do you expect the minimum points will develop to? So if we go back to our rounds of invitations, it's really easy, guys. You just have to go here, and then you can just type in whatever topic here fits, and then it will automatically sort by that. So if we look for 2025, January, we've had 2 draws, 2 big ones, with 410 being the lowest. And if we go back historically, back on August the 15th, when they started doing this at the beginning, it went all the way down to 394. And before that, the lowest French that we've had is 336, I think. And that's pretty crazy. So why have the numbers gone up since February 29th, 2024? Why have those numbers consistently gone up? Because from the very first day that they started doing this, people started to realize, I better learn French. And so there are a number of people, and more people are becoming aware of it from outside of Canada in French-speaking countries that are applying, that have opportunities to immigrate directly, not through CEC, but as Alicia has indicated, through the Federal Skilled Worker Program. So is this, hitting the right areas? Is this what, as a country, what we, are really in the best interest? And I just feel like the decisions sometimes that are being made in government are just, it's like, well, I'm going to do whatever I want now because we may not get reelected, but who knows? We could have another minority government, and all of these things, then they're going to have to deal with it and answer for them. And regardless, it's just a little bit disappointing at how it's played out. Okay, let's jump to a few more here. Let's go to, let's see. Shalia says, good morning, Mark and Alicia, watching from my office in Calgary. Don't let your employer see. For the new category-based list of EE, do you know how long they will keep the category-based list before they change again? Thanks. So Alicia, how long did we have the previous list before they made these shifts?
Yeah, we had it basically for 2 years. They didn't change it until now, and then technically they said that they will do a review, they will talk to their industry partners, they will talk to different stakeholders within the immigration system and try to figure out what are the requirements. And Mark and I have seen various incarnations of express entry and other economic pathways that are trying to target certain occupations, certain NOC codes, certain industries. And the risk always is that the government gets it wrong, right? We can't predict for some things like tariffs, for example. So if we're looking at construction workers, but now companies don't want to start any capital projects because they have no idea what aluminum and steel are going to cost them, or lumber, it makes things really difficult. And so the risk when immigration is picking certain NOCs and certain industries is that they don't have a crystal ball either. They can't perfectly predict. So yes, we can look at trends, we can look at economic requirements for regions, but it's all just a guess. And so the benefit of trying to look at an overarching human capital is that if people have really high language, education, work experience, and if they're young, generally they are better suited to adapting to whatever conditions and economic curveballs are thrown at us. So that's kind of the history on where things were. Um, we'll see how long they keep the categories, but they have said that it should be at least reviewed on a yearly basis. So they should have it for the year. Everything should be around as it is on these targeted category based, unless there is a complete change in government.
All right. Next question. Let's see what we've got here. Okay, Curtin says, with respect, I would like to ask a question regarding general draw. Could we expect any general draw in the nearest future? It would be great help to get clarification about general draws. Thank you. So once again, Alicia, if we jump back to our list here, and I'll just pull up the rounds of invitations if I can find them here. And we go back and we just search by general. The last one we had was way back in April of 2024, which is, it's so amazing how fast time flies, because I'm really quite surprised that was the last time we had a general draw, like almost a whole year. And
It's largely because they changed the terminology. So they don't call it general draws anymore. So now they're just basically doing a CEC draw when they want to do something that's not targeted.
Yes. And it's interesting when you look at this, even before this, they'd call it, I think it was no program specified. Let's see, what was it called? Let's see if I can find this. Yeah. So they used to call it no program specified, and then they transitioned it to general. And now, one thing I want to point out, I'll just pull it up while we're on the fly here. I've searched this up so many times, it just pops up. This, you guys have to understand, is what's driving the ship with the selection of rounds of invitations. So, and I've covered this in lots of times in previous episodes, but if you look here, you guys, you'll see that no longer do we have kind of a high skill category. Instead, what they've done is they've got their federal economic priorities and then the in-Canada focus. And this is where Alicia is talking about that split. So 82,980 versus 41,700. So the federal economic priorities, those are the category-based draws. And then the in-Canada focus, that's like our CEC draws. And they may, to some extent, mix. I don't know. Maybe they accomplish both things. But the reality is, when they first announced this, one of the first questions I had was whether or not these priority categories, was an exclusive list, whether it was a complete list. And we couldn't figure out that, when we were going through this, and let's see if I can jump back to the specific category based. There's more information on it, category based. Because when after they made this announcement here, I looked and said, okay, healthcare, trade, and French. All right, well, is that the only three? But then, I'm jumping around here, we noticed that this list didn't really change. And so all of the same ones, like transport was still here. There was just a whole bunch nothing had changed. But now we see that, it just really irritates me that they put, I don't know what that is, Alicia. French is on the list here, healthcare, which has been greatly expanded. And we covered this. Igor and I, in a previous YouTube video, covered this at length. And Igor has a great little blog post as well on this topic. STEM is really only science, engineering, and math. There's virtually no tech in there now. So they should just call it SEM. Trade occupation.
Cybersecurity.
Yeah, exactly. There's cybersecurity. Yeah. But trade occupations are great limited. Ag has virtually nothing. It's like butchers, I think. And then the brand new category of education occupations, which I don't know how that works. Like, is maybe in Ontario,
and we were wrong on that
shortage.
one too, Mark. Somebody a few weeks ago, I remember, said, are they going to add like early childhood
yes,
care
Alicia,
workers?
that's
And we were
right.
like, I don't think so.
Education, school
And then
teachers.
they did.
I'm like, no way. And then they do. Absolutely. So I was wrong on two fronts. So basically what this means is that Minister Miller and I are not on the same wavelength. We think absolutely differently on immigration policy. So I don't know what to say, but he's the one pulling the shots. So I'll just continue to use this thing and mostly get it wrong. All right. So there's the reality. So as far as the general draws, because of the new priorities that are in those annual levels plans, we are not expecting to see general draws. So because of these and the new, the new priorities, which we have here, if we go back up to our economic categories, this federal economic priorities and in Canada focus, the federal economic priorities, if a person is outside of Canada and they fit within one of these new categories, then as an FSW, you have a shot. Or if you go through a provincial nominee program. But at this stage, that's with however millions of people in Canada that don't have pathways to PR. They're definitely, unless you speak French, you're not going to have a direct pathway unless a PNP has a room for you. But even the PNPs have been sliced in half. So yeah,
And
that's
so, and
mhm.
I did see a couple comments on the new rural community pathways and the
Mm,
Francophone community pathways. And so this is, I guess, the one ray of light for people who happen to be inside Canada, but you must have a job offer, right? This is all based on having a job offer in one of these designated communities, and then that community needs to give you the endorsement letter. And you're right, there are not a lot of websites that are up and running yet. So this is something where you still need to stay tuned and double check, okay, well, which communities have the specific details of the program listed publicly because they announced it, but not everything is fully fleshed out yet.
yes. All right. We've got a super chat from Techno. He says, I've added my spouse in my PR application. And then the question is, I am eligible for the Bridging Open work permit. My spouse's work permit is also expiring with me. Can I add my spouse in my Bridging Open work permit application to get her work permit? So just as a start, I'm going to ring this bell, Techno, because once again, you've said, how, can my spouse? And so those are things that we absolutely want you to book a consultation about. However, when it comes to qualifying, there were recent changes by the government to further reduce the availability of spousal open work permits for accompanying spouses across the board, whether you're a C41 or C42, whether you're through the international student, a spouse accompanying an international student, like it, as probably was the case when you were studying, and then the transition to the postgrad work permit. So under the Bridging Open work permit, it may be possible, yes, for your spouse to apply. However, I would strongly encourage you to look at two blog posts that were recently done. This excellent one on Bridging Open work permits by Alicia, and then Igor also did one just immediately before that on the spousal open work permit changes. And so I'd encourage you to take a look at both of those, or and for sure book a consultation so that we can help to direct you and guide you. But Alicia, what are your...
Yeah, and so if you go to the IRCC webpage and you look at open work permits for family members of foreign workers who can apply, and they talk about the changes to eligibility that were announced January 21st, 2025. And then they go through and they are specifically asking you, did you apply? Do you have an AOR through an eligible economic permanent resident program? Yes or no? And so, yeah, so on here, and then it'll go down to eligible permanent residence applications. And so they want to know, do you actually qualify for that Bridging Open work permit? And then if you do, then they will give you a set of instructions. If you don't qualify properly for a Bridging Open work permit and you're looking at the high skilled, low skilled work permit rules, then it's a whole different ball of wax. So Bridging open work permits and spousal open work permits for family members has become extremely complex because of all these changes. So be super careful. I also had a consultant and a client who's hired me recently because there are differences between bridging open work permit and bridging closed work permits. And depending on the type of PNP nomination that you get, some are employer restricted and some aren't. And this is all that we talk about in the blog article and also the podcast that we put out on this issue. But what's been happening as well is if you filed a paper-based, which is now through the PR portal application, so a non-express entry linked PNP application, it is taking so darn long to get that AOR that even if people tried to save their work permit and put in a bridging without their AOR, they're actually getting refusals on those applications. And then a couple days later, the AOR is coming through. So make sure that you're following these requirements for a bridging open work permit or a bridging closed work permit really, really carefully, and then looking at all the added layers for spouses.
right. Next question here. This one is, actually, I'll pull this one up here. Claire, she says, "Hey, Mark, my husband turning 45 has a full-time job offer as a heavy equipment operator in Alberta." Okay. The employer submitted an LMIA in early November 2024, but we're still waiting. So, Alicia, we also had the privilege of submitting a few LMIAs around that time. How long did ours take, Alicia?
So not November of 2024. I helped an employer submit last April. So we actually had submitted in February, and then immigration waited a month before they asked for payment from the company, and then that HR person was gone, and then we had to resubmit the whole thing because payment didn't get done in 24 hours, which was ridiculous. Anyways, we submitted in April, and they just got approval. And so not only did all those ads have to stay up, the wage ranges changed, the LMIA low wage, high wage cutoff changed. Those ads had to be renewed. Job Bank is not letting you extend that ad for a long period of time. So every 30 days, you've got to do a new ad. You can't have any gaps in the advertising history. It is a giant mess. So 10 months. 10 months it took them, and LMIA processing times online with the SDC are completely inaccurate. So unfortunately, Claire, this is make sure that you guys all have some way to try to extend your status in the meantime, because I do not think that LMIA is coming through anytime soon.
Yeah. And we can also confirm, we also submitted another LMIA for another sales company, essentially a month or so after that, or pretty close to it. And
Mhm.
they only just got their approval recently as well. So Claire says, "We were in the UK and suggested they use your services, but they handled it themselves. With all the recent changes, do you think it's likely to be approved, and any idea on timing?" So this is one thing you guys have to realize too. There is an initial kind of completeness kind of check thing. And if for whatever reason they feel it's not accurate, they will just close the application and notify you, "Sorry, it doesn't meet the requirements." But but sometimes after it meets that kind of completeness check, they're not going to look at it for months and months and months and months later. And if they don't agree that the employer did everything they were supposed to do, then guess what? You've lost all of that time. So that's the one main concern, and one danger if someone is just wading into this horrible world on their own. And Alicia and I have been doing this for 20 years, and I think we can pretty consistently say LMIAs are the worst applications that we do. Pretty close.
Well, and I've had a number of employers try to say, oh, I can do it. There's no problem. I can figure out all the rules on LMIAs and do it myself, and it won't be a problem. And I'd say 90% of the time they get refused on missing something in terms of the advertising and recruiting. They just did not realize they had to do something. And then, so Claire, if you're asking, will there be a problem in the LMIA? If the company tried to do it themselves and they didn't have somebody guiding them through who's been through this a number of times, I think there's a high likelihood that there's going to be a deficiency in that application. If you're asking, is your work permit going to be refused? That's again another problem. So sometimes what happens is, the LMIA gets submitted by the company, and then the worker realizes that they need to submit an extension application pending the LMIA. And what we've been seeing more and more is that immigration opens up the worker's application and says, too bad, there's no LMIA to back it up. We're not going to wait for another 6 months for
Yep.
ESDC. We're just going to refuse your work permit. So that's another issue.
Yeah. The super chat came in from AN, and I'm going to ring this bell right now because this is not something that we can answer for you, but I'll bring it up and see if we can pull something out. So they applied for PR, OINP Master, no restrictions on employment in April 2024. Listed Ottawa as the destination in the 0008 and GSMS notes. Got a job in Toronto. Will changing my address affect my PR application? So this is something that we can't answer because we don't know, like, to what extent, yeah, like I don't want to wade into saying there's no issues with this because we just don't have enough information here. Recommend you book a consult and we can look at it. It may be that it's possible that it won't be an issue, but like the ONP master, no restriction on employment, is exactly that, no restriction on employment. And usually most PNPs don't have an issue with you moving from one city to another if it's more of an open. But understand, if there are, and we don't have enough information to be able to say, yes, that's not an issue, And I don't know, Alicia, if you want to dive into any general provisions or not, but this is one that becomes extremely well. Just I don't want to get into specifics with this.
So my concern on this, any of the expression of interest OINP streams, is that people would have had to have a score, right? You would have had to have an EOI score for the specific draw under which you were pulled. And sometimes what happens is if you are in a different region, there are different points assigned to you based on region of living and work, and sometimes school. And so that's something where you're going to have to go back and cross-reference. Does changing anything in your application change the points that you have, and would it have changed the cutoff for the draw under which you were invited to apply?
All right, we'll go to our next super chat. This is from Pratik. Pratik says, "Hey, Mark and Alicia, for express entry, should the NOC code be based on job duties or job requirements, especially if the requirements aren't met?" So I think really, there's a couple ways that we can answer this. So job duties are always what the NOC code is based on. So you're never going to just change to a different NOC code because your title matches this other one and you didn't have the employment requirements for the one that really is the best fit. The NOC code drives the ship. You need to demonstrate that you've performed a substantial number of those main duties listed in the NOC, and that's really the most important thing. The employment requirements in many instances are specifically excluded from that evaluation. In other words, the regulations specifically state that the employment requirements are not to be considered within the context of determining foreign work experience, for example. So, but what officers can do is they can look and see, all right, well, if it's a regulated trade in Canada, or if it's there, you need a license to practice, well, they're going to question whether or not you're actually performing that job in Canada because you're not authorized based on, employment regulations to actually work in that occupation. Now, it's different in a foreign country. They don't pay any attention or really use that as a factor when they're assessing foreign work experience, but it can be, although not explicitly stated in the regulations, it can absolutely be a factor in whether or not they accept your having performed that job under that NOC for points. All right, let's see. Next on our list here. Oh, this is a good insight too. So Tom Davis says, "Hi, Mark from Brockville. There is a need for construction workers in our area." Well, Tom, I think we should just have an open round table for people to talk about it. I think that would be a lot of fun. So connect with me, Tom. I'd love to hear your side of the story, and yeah, we can maybe have a special live where we have a bunch of guests that come and talk about the general state of the construction industry in Canada, across Canada. Because remember, this policy of Mark Miller is not designed specifically for Toronto, which was the original pilot. It was the Toronto, out of status construction worker program for PR. And now I have to assume, although I haven't seen specific details, maybe they've been released, I haven't seen them. I have to assume it's national in scope to some extent. Okay, John Snow says, "Hey, Mark, can I add my spouse after Ontario PNP as accompanying? But the problem is that my CRS score will go down below the minimum for that OMP draw. Is there any way around it?" Okay, we've seen a lot of this too, right, Alicia? And I can tell you, John, in the past, Ontario would consistently say, "We don't care what you do. We don't care," right? If you listed your spouse or not, the nomination is for you. However, we are in a whole new world now. So I'm always leery to make any substantive changes to the express entry application that are inconsistent with what was presented to the PNPs. There's complete information sharing across them. So will it be a problem, John? Well, it could. But what people are generally doing, and sometimes what I'll do is I'll send an email back and try to get confirmation from the province saying, "Hey, I wasn't going to list my spouse before, but is there an issue if I list them now?" And if they come back and say, "No, we don't care," well, then you can proceed. In your profile, you add your spouse. Yes, it may affect the original slot score like the ONP often loves. It might affect that, but for immigration purposes, you're going to get that extra 600 points for the nomination, and then it doesn't make a difference for the federal. However, I saw recently regulatory changes, Alicia, that suggested that IRCC has always had the ability to look at anything with respect to a PNP nomination and revisit any aspect of it themselves, not just the background and security. And the recent regulatory change is to actually remove that ability of the federal government to evaluate anything other than the security and background, which is their part within a PNP nomination, which is interesting. I don't know where that sits on the table. And, obviously with the government kind of shut down for now. So I guess we'll see how that plays out. Anything to add to that one, Alicia?
Yeah, and it's always a risk if you're falling below the cutoff that you were nominated for in the first place. And so, just like Mark said, if you no longer meet the points under which you were invited to apply and then nominated, there is always a risk that you could lose that PR application. And also, you want to be honest, right? So, you want to make sure that you are updating immigration with the most recent information and telling them what your intent is. And if, like Mark said, they say, okay, that's fine. At the provincial level, then maybe you want to take that risk, but it's possible that the federal government, when they're looking at your immigration application, could say, we don't think you meet the program requirements under the PNP any longer. Or it's possible if there's a change with the PNP policy that they say, we could cancel your nomination. Different provinces have different policies. We know that Alberta, for example, is really mean. They
Yeah.
won't go back and change or help you at all. So it really does depend on the province too, and it probably depends on, changes in policy or leadership within that PNP. So there's a risk.
All right. MLU offers the following super chat. He says, if a person got a P2 email in the PR application express entry and applied through the PNP under Alberta Tech with no restriction in employer via open work permit, that's interesting. I don't know. Alberta Tech requires a job offer, so I'm not sure. Okay, anyways, can a person change employer while waiting for the ECOPER? So I'm going to ring this triangle again, MLU. I'm very, very curious as to what you mean by this, because the Alberta Tech is specifically an employer-driven process. It requires a job offer from an employer. So I'm not sure how there's no restriction in employer via an open work permit. Alicia, do you have any, can
The
you make
only
any
thing I
sense
can
out of this?
Well, the only thing I'm wondering, MLU, is maybe, so there was that federal policy that said certain PNPs were able
Mm-hmm.
to kind of give an amnesty work permit to people that were in the stream whose status was expiring within a certain period of time. And then the PNP could go and basically give them an open work permit in the meantime to kind of get them through so that their processing would be delayed on their PR application. But in the meantime, they'd have a work permit, and it was up to the PNPs to decide who they wanted to offer that to. So I'm wondering maybe if that's what happened in your circumstance, but if that's true, it's super complex. And yes, Alberta Tech does need a job offer. And so if you no longer have a job offer from somebody who's been vetted by the province, that seems
Yeah,
to
the
be a
feds
problem.
could shut you down. So that's a distinct possibility. Joe, on this on the same kind of topic of accelerated tech in Alberta, Joe Sepeda, long-term follower, says, "Hey, Mark and Alicia, looks like learning French is still the way because nothing is moving in tech pathway for AIP." Well, guys, generally speaking, for most provinces, there's very little moving. And back to our previous discussion in terms of the annual levels plans, which we were looking at, one of the main concerns that happened, and Minister Miller, through a number of different tweets and different comments that he's made, explained one of the reasons they have gone. And as I go through here, you can see the provincial nominees were basically reduced in half. So there was 110, I think, before. They've been reduced down to 55. Some of those have been pulled back up and incorporated within the In Canada focus, or the federal economic priorities. We don't know exactly where, but some have been pulled up because the overall numbers here for economic immigration, these overall numbers have actually gone up for express entry related kind of applicants compared to last year. But there was a little bit of discussion back and forth with the provinces, and Minister Miller wasn't happy with their willingness to take refugees and didn't think they were taking their responsibility in that regard. So he said one of the reasons why was, reducing the nominations was, in a way, was to punish the provinces for not following suit with what they thought they should be doing. I have a huge issue with that as well, because then it punishes all the other economic immigrants, like our friend here, Joe, who have been waiting and have a great job, who are in tech, have an employers willing to support them, but no options going forward. And many provinces are in this situation. So 2025 is what I would call the dark ages of economic PR in Canada through the PNPs, maybe the dark ages of PNP. So
Well,
unless you speak
and,
French, yeah.
and Joe, unless you speak French in a couple ways, because the other thing that I've been recommending to people is if you do have basic French skills. So if you can hit that NCLC 5, right, then you
Mm,
could, if you have an employer who's willing to support you, have that employer go and register through the employer portal, file an employer portal offer under Mobilité Francophone, because then it's not a PR pathway, but at least it gives you that little bit of extra time to transition to an employer specific work permit as long as you're outside the province of Quebec and you are eligible, you've got your French language exam TCF or TEF with an NCLC 5. And we'll see. I mean, we'll have to see if they change that back to a 7. But so far, Mobilité Francophone for that employer specific employer portal work permit only requires an NCLC 5. So if you can hit that, it gives you a little bit more breathing space, hopefully, for extending your work permit while you wait, maybe for those federal levels to come down on express entry, for them to get rid of job offer points, and maybe you'll have a high enough CRS score.
absolutely. And like I said, this is, if I did, when was it? Was it a year ago? Maybe it was a full year ago, Alicia, that I did my when I traveled to Quebec and did that presentation. No, maybe it was last fall. Oh, it's all a blur. But I consider this the golden age of Francophone immigration right now. It really is. It's on every aspect, work permit side, the PR side. There's just the availability of various programs for people that speak French. Canada is a golden place for you to consider if you're outside of the country. Okay, let's see here. We'll get to a few more quick ones. Okay, this is an interesting one. It's another one of these. Subin says, with the new government coming in and a possible early election, how will it affect the express entry draws? Also, will there be any category-based draws before an early election? So this will go on as business as usual. I think the categories, we will see category-based draws coming. And the reality is, I don't need to I don't need to rub this right here to figure that out. They will continue, but what the impact of an early election will have on express entry. Well, the Conservatives originally created express entry, so they're not going to do away with it. But it really comes down to the numbers, I think. And it seems like the mainstream media likes to talk about that the most. What are the numbers that the Conservatives would, go for in terms of those annual levels plans compared to what the Liberals have indicated they would do. And after the election, will the Liberal government, if they retain power as a minority or get a majority again, will they keep the levels the way they are? Will they reduce them further? We just don't know. That's one of the great crystal, not even our magical crystal ball will help us to answer that question. So what we're advising clients is do everything that you can to be as competitive as you can right now, and do not limit yourself to just one program if you're available. You need to cast your seeds broadly and just see what hits the soil and actually grows into permanent residence. So pursue every option that's available to you. That's the advice that we commonly
But
focus on. Yes.
But the caveat is this. I've had a few people who are trying to change their NOCs, right? Because the categories changed. And so now they're saying,
Yeah.
oh, well,
Well, actually, no,
maybe
I'm
I
not
can
that really. Yeah.
categorize. Yeah, especially in STEM. Maybe I can categorize my job as this instead of this. That has real big warning signs going off around it. If you've had previous express entry profiles and you claimed a certain knock and now you're changing your knock, especially if you had employer specific work permits that went along with that, and especially if they were ICTs. Because if you were on an intercompany transfer, you can't just willy nilly change your knock because you're going to be offside what you were allowed to do under the scope of your work permit. So just be careful if you're retroactively trying to change things.
Yes. All right. For the next one, I'm going to bring this back. This is quite comical. I love this one. All right. Here we go. Ooh. Okay. Here's the question. It says, and this is completely in line with Alicia and my expertise. We're fully apprised of everything that goes on with this. It says, now that Mark Carney is prime minister, when will the general elections be held? Well, I think personally, September. What are your thoughts, Alicia? I think they're going to hang on as long as they can to rebuild the voter base. And I don't think there's going to be any elections till September. That's my vote at the earliest. Alicia, what are your
You know
views?
what? I honestly think it's gonna what is happening with Donald Trump,
Trump?
basically.
Yeah.
I think that's gonna dictate when the election gets held. So, and that's a whole other ball of wax.
I hear you. The only factor I guess I would put in is that the Liberals didn't care much about it when it was happening. They shut down Parliament in order to reorganize their ship. And it would not surprise me at all that they would continue to build off of this panic that we're feeling to, all it takes is a crisis for a party to try to stay in power. And I think the US was classic for that one. Whenever a president wanted to get reelected, they'd start a war somewhere else. And well, I guess we've got an economic one that's brewing here between Canada and the US, much to my disappointment and sadness. And yeah, you get a bunch of crazy people and all kinds of things happen. Okay, so there you go. That's my view. I say September. Alicia says hopefully sooner, and I do hope sooner, so that we can come together as a country and get some leadership and move forward. So, all right, let's see. Next, I think we've got a bunch of kind of general stuff, but this one, Alicia, is right in your wheelhouse. Once again, we've had other questions on this topic. Nima says, hand pink waving. Mark and Alicia, is it mandatory to have family connection for pharmacy assistant as healthcare stream for Alberta Express entry? Thank you.
Mhm. And so, Nima, Alberta, and I've talked about this, I think, in our last podcast or our
Mm-hmm.
live stream last week as well. So go to the Alberta website, go down to the eligibility requirements for streams. And when you're doing a worker EOI for Alberta, there's nothing that actually does a logic check to figure out if you're eligible for your category. So if you're doing a federal express entry application, it'll tell you at the end, not eligible. It'll just bounce your profile and you won't be able to put it in there. Not so for Alberta. So Alberta, it's up to you to go and make sure you meet the eligibility criteria for the category that you are applying for. However, the way that they're doing their expression of interest is as long as you are honest and everything is accurate in your worker expression of interest, it's really then up to the Alberta PNP to decide how they're going to pick and choose when they do their rounds of invitations or their notifications of interest. So basically, as long as you are correct in what is your express entry profile if you have one? What is your NOC? How many years have you worked in Alberta? Where was your education? And as long as you're accurate, so you either do have a Canadian Alberta family member or you don't, um, what they've said in terms of the drop down for the category that you're interested in is that it's just an expression of interest. They could pull you from a different category. In fact, I've had clients who we had a rural community endorsement letter. We thought that, we clicked rural renewal, but they actually pulled him under AOS. And so then we had to go back and make sure before we accepted that notification of interest, do I meet all the stuff for AOS? And luckily he did. But this is where, as long as you have correctly identified everything, the drop down for what you're interested in is not, it's neither here nor there. It's really up to the province to decide how they're going to pick and choose their categories.
Yeah, great question. Okay, Elisa here has an interesting question. She says, hello, Mark and Alicia. Is it possible to have two closed work permits within the Francophone Mobility Program? So the short answer is yes, people can hold more than one work permit at a time. Previously, I had situations where clients were consultants from the US and they had multiple employer-specific work permits to allow them to work for multiple clients in Canada at that time. However, we're in a world now, Elisa, where you have an employer portal, where the job offer is registered, where your hours of work are indicated in there. And if you have one work permit where it says you're working 40 hours a week, and you have another work permit issued for another employer that's concurrent with the one you currently have, and both under the Francophone Mobility, both employer specific, and they both say you're working 40 hours a week, well, you need to then be able to justify how that fits when an audit comes. And that's the one issue that I've seen that has changed in the context of the employer portal and the registration of job offers. Alicia, any other thoughts to add for Alicia here?
Yeah, because also the employer has an obligation to notify immigration if there's a material change in circumstances. And so if when they filed those employer portal offers, you were working 40 hours or 30 hours, and now you're only working 20 hours in one job and 20 hours in the other, technically they have an obligation to notify IRCC about a change in conditions, because this is different than what they had originally put in that employer portal.
Yep. Okay, I got another question here from Amy, which is a super. She says, work to restoration as a visitor. What's the process? So she also says here, can you shed more light on it and the usual processing time? So when it comes to restoring, Alicia, so this is an example of someone whose work permit has expired. They're in the restoration period, which is 90 days. You have to restore your status. And they determine, I want to restore to the status of a visitor. And Amy is asking, what's the usual process for this? And what's the timing of it? Well, I can pull up the processing time, but Amy, this is a video in and of itself to walk through the whole process. But generally speaking, Alicia, do you have any intel while I'm just pulling up the processing times?
Yeah, and actually I pulled it up. Temporary residence visitor visa from inside Canada is okay, so visitor extension on a visitor record. A
Yeah,
visitor visa is a different thing.
yeah,
So,
116 days right now. And
yeah.
restoration theoretically fits within the same, realm as
Mhm.
an extension application.
Yeah. And so the difficulty on this one is make sure that you're doing that restoration application properly. And there's a separate fee to be paid, and you've got to prove temporary intent. And I'm doing a super complex one right now where somebody's trying to ask to restore to a work permit status. And that is even harder because, of course, you have to stop working. So, same thing in your situation, you'd have to stop working. You'd ask to change to a visitor status retroactively. But immigration's going to be wondering, what's your game plan? How are you going to stay in Canada without working illegally? And how do you prove that? And so, make sure that you can show that you've got ability to support yourself, you've got enough finances, that you're not going to be working illegally in Canada. And if it's going to take 116 days for them to process your application, what's your game plan? How are you going to spend your time, and what are you going to be doing in Canada while that application for a visitor record is pending? It's also a problem, of course, if you leave Canada. So make sure that if you are going to leave Canada, you realize that restoration application could be canceled if you leave Canada during that time. So you'll want to think about, I'm assuming that you've submitted some sort of PR application. So you'll want to think about what are your best options given that PR application. And sometimes the PR application needs you to be in that province working, for example, if you did a PNP. So um, it's not ideal if you're trying to do a restoration to a visitor.
Yeah. All right. Rosie asks for general information. Is it correct that multiple full-time jobs in Canada under tier 0 to 3 will be eligible to accumulate the CEC years? Say 6 months as a baker, 6 months, 1 year equals, CEC. Yes. So Rosie, that's the very nature of CEC. We covered this at length in the Express Entry Accelerator and the accompanying masterclass. We have sections on this when it comes to eligibility for CEC. But the reality is, it's not like the federal skilled worker program where it has to be continuous, full time in the same NOC. It can be different NOCs. You just have to ensure that you can demonstrate within the previous 3 years that you have accumulated that 1 year of skilled work experience that's paid, that is at the right tier. And yeah, as long as you can do that.
The other caveat on that is that you can't work more than 30 hours in any given week. So if you were trying to say, hey, I'm working 32 hours at this job and 32 hours at another job in the exact same week, that's not allowed. Immigration says they cap it at 30 hours in any given week. And so just make sure that when you are carefully spreadsheeting, I recommend people spreadsheet their work experience, that they make sure that they are adding up their hours, but not double counting for any week over 30.
Yeah. Another common misconception we have that's covered within the course is Kalea says, due to COVID, I studied online at my home country for 6 months. While studying, I also worked. Does that work experience can be counted towards my foreign work experience? And the answer is yes, it can. Alicia, we just were reviewing just before we got on our live some other questions that often come up for people who ask, well, I'm studying in Canada full time. What if I am also maintaining a foreign job, that I'm working virtually and there's no connection with Canada, it's entirely outside of Canada? Well, can I count that towards the federal skilled worker program? And what was the answer that was given, Alicia?
And the answer is yeah, it can be done. So what you cannot do is claim high-skilled Canadian work experience while you are in Canada as a full-time student. Okay, so if you are a full-time student in Canada, you can't claim Canadian high-skilled work experience like if you're on a co-op or you're working part-time. That doesn't count. But if you are outside Canada, like Kalea is saying here, yeah, and you're a full-time student outside Canada and you're working and it's a high-skilled job, sure, that counts as foreign work experience. Make sure that it is high skilled, make sure you've got proof of employment, and you can back that up with a letter from your employer and pay stubs and everything else. And just like Mark said too, it might be possible to be physically inside Canada as a full-time Canadian student, but you might be completely working remotely for an employer outside Canada doing outside Canadian work that might count towards foreign skilled work experience. You're going to have to lay that out carefully in your application.
Yes. All right. Okay. Sabri here says, hope you are both doing well. Can you show a trial from your express entry course in one of your lives? Yeah, we can do that. But effectively, as far as a trial and what is contained inside, it's pretty simple. So I'll just go in here where I log in and I'll just show you just a quick little overview. So the Express Entry Accelerator is a series of on-demand lessons. Like I said, there's 70 individual lessons that walk you through the whole process from learning the basics. Individual lessons cover a variety of categories, including some case scenarios for how it works when you're trying to calculate your CRS, as well as how French speaking abilities affect your ability to score CRS points. We also have a bonus lesson with our friend Jean K here, who gives tips on successfully improving your scores under the TEF and links back to a number of resources that he provides. And so on the French side, it's well covered here within the course. We go through eligibility, like we talked about eligibility for the federal skilled worker, the CEC. There's no federal skilled trades, so I don't even have a lesson on that anymore because there's no point to having it at this stage. And then we go through step-by-step videos on each section of the profile. If you're a principal applicant, we have individual lessons, and it's all on demand, so you can pick and choose the ones that fit to you, so it doesn't waste time. And there's a section on spouses. If you don't have a spouse, you can skip all of these lessons. And then it talks about finalizing and submitting your application, how to improve your score. Then we progress to the EAPR. We have sections for all of the principal applicant sections, including updates for the contact details, where now you're adding your address, and another section on personal history, which is brand new for the EAPR side. Same thing for accompanying spouses. And then we also have individual lessons for dependent children, whether they're minor or they're adults. And of course, then the document checklist. And in one of our recent podcasts, Alicia referred to one of the checklists as, I think, the SMART checklist. I call it SMART and dumb. So the dumb checklist is when it flips back and it doesn't allow you to have a section where you can upload client information, and it genericizes your work history. So instead of listing the title to distinguish which record of employment you're going to upload your documents to, it just says 1, 2, 3 kind of thing. And same thing for police clearance certificates. So we talk about understanding the checklist glitches here, previewing your score, all those kinds of things. And then the best, I think, most powerful section of the whole course is the Mastering Your Document section, where we have an overview of the document checklist. Then we cover every single document that a person would need depending upon their situation. You can see passports, e-medicals, police certificates. And within here, I have a video that I've created that talks about all of the problem areas, the ins and outs. By the time you get through this course, you know as much as Alicia and I do about Express Entry. And it's designed to give you the tools you need. But we have these download sections that are full of sample documents, sample police clearance certificates from a variety of different countries. So they're all listed in here as well. And as we continue down this path, education documents, study history, records of employment, and we covered that already earlier. Then this is our custom GPT to assist with drafting reference letters. And this is something I kind of hinted at before. When you just upload, you can literally upload your reference letter and it will help to narrow down your NOC codes for you. This is a custom GPT that Igor and I put together. And it's designed to kind of act as your paralegal to help you put things together, including developing what we call our NOC selection tool, which is a table that breaks down your duties exactly with the duties in the NOC. So that's another component that fits within there. Then the distinguish, between records of employment and offers of employment, a section on use of representatives, digital photos, and that's not it. There's even more. So you actually have to go down here and expand it and go to page 2. Birth certificates for children, proof of sibling relationship, proof of funds, which Alicia and I, there's going to be a new podcast episode dropping today on this specific topic, which is really awesome. It's really good insight on how to prove this. Proof of marriage. I've had clients who've got their applications rejected because they uploaded the wrong marriage certificate. Proof of name change, language tests, ECAs, letters of explanation, which is also a super powerful section because this is the secret sauce that clarifies and it's kind of acts as a shield to prevent you from any misrep finding. And we have sample documents, sample letters of explanation, document specific and specific EAPR, we call them LOEs, and instructions on how to complete those in a way that really helps to clarify things for an officer. So if there is anything that's a problem, you can get it, you can head it off and really frame it the way you want. And then just a section on PNP nominee certificates. So let's see, we've got these, and then I'm going to go back one more. And then we even have one last section. I think I'm almost there. Wow, I've got so many back buttons. One last section is a member resource section. And here we have specific videos that add to and include other information related to work experience. And we do cover self-employment. We cover, language, eligibility, dependents, job offers, and this is constantly growing. We're still adding lots of this, lots of information to here just for all one location. So there you go. So that's the course. And if you go to our the link below, excuse me, you'll see that when you're registering for the course here, like I said, there's over 10 hours of content if you choose to watch every piece of it. But when you enroll, the cost of it is $347 US, and you have lifetime access to this. So as soon as those job offer points are dropped, then I will be creating some new lessons. You'll be added in. People that subscribed back in 2016 still have access to every upgraded version of this. And ultimately, remember, the master classes happen every 2 weeks, and you guys can come back as often as you want. There's no limit in the number of times you join me in the master classes, which are different than this. They're more like a Zoom call where people can actually come on and talk about their situation, and everybody learns from one another. And it's just kind of like this big family. And another cool part of this is that there's a community group that's associated with everyone who's registered for the Express Entry Accelerator. So there you go. And there's a link in the description. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. And I think actually, I think tonight, is it tonight that I do it? Oh, it's all a blur here. I can't look. Maybe tonight I'm doing one. I think I am actually. So you'll get it. If you subscribe now, you'll get access to it. All right, there we go. There's the quick sneak peek. And I don't know, Alicia, if there's anything else that we hadn't covered that, that you saw that would be worth bringing up. Jessica says, is the Express Entry course recommended just for people that already have the CRS points needed? No, like the whole thing is designed to help you understand not only where you sit if you have the points, but tips on how to increase your score, how to get more points, strategies that will help you decide whether or not it's even worth it for you to proceed. The eligibility requirements and all of those things play a role because at the end of the day, people now might start to make changes in what they're doing that will give them a greater chance a year from now. And like I said, if you subscribe to it now, you have access 2-3 years from now, if ultimately that's when your scores are high enough to get drawn. So it's all designed to kind of clarify all of those, all of those problem areas that people run into. All right. Anything else, Alicia, before we wrap it up here with our fine folks joining us?
Yeah, I saw a number of people who are saying, they're out of status or their applications were
Mm,
refused and they're looking
yeah.
at restoration applications. And I think
Mhm.
this is something we're going to be seeing more and more of because there's long processing times. And
Yeah.
just like we talked about, it's taking immigration a very long time to process PR portal applications. And then in the
Mhm.
meantime, people's work permits are expiring and then they don't have that AOR. Or you had a principal applicant. And a spouse, or you had a situation where the employer's applied for an LMIA and you don't have it yet and you applied for a work permit. So please book a consult. So, you know, if you need advice specifically about your situation, talk to Mark or Igor or I, and we can give you advice to head you in the right direction or tell you, here are the things that are really going to be a problem. And sometimes it's making that really tough call that you go home in the meantime. And maybe that's the best way to try to preserve your options because, when I see people who are saying, well, I asked for reconsideration, how long is it going to take? There's no there's no guarantee that immigration is ever going to respond to you. And
Oh,
so it's really tough, guys. Talk to us and we can give you some advice. The Express Entry course is fantastic if you can't afford to hire us. It at least gives you a very high quality tool. Mark, you said people will know the amount that we know, but I think the thing that's
yeah.
different is that you and I have sat here for 20 years and talked to people, and we've seen variations
Yeah.
and permutations on
Yeah, of
all the
everything. Yeah,
things that
that's
can go
fair.
wrong, right?
Yeah.
And that's why it's valuable to hire us. And so the course is a fantastic tool if you can't afford to hire us. But the reason people do hire us is because we have seen all the ways that things go wrong. We're a little bit paranoid, and we can sit
Yeah.
there and go through and put our officer hat on and take a look at all the aspects of your application in conjunction and say, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. And we start pulling on that string, and then a couple other things don't make sense. And so that's the value, is that we're looking holistically at everything and working with you to make sure that that application is as strong as it possibly can be. And if there's something that's wrong, we will talk to you and have a hard conversation about maybe you need to unwind something here, or maybe
Yeah.
you need to have a tough conversation about coming forward with information that you may have misrepresented in the past.
Yeah. And we deal with that a lot. If you go to our website, you'll see here we're constantly building out new content. We're actually revising our site, but there's detailed information, express entry, CEC, FSW, category-based draws. All of this is kind of designed to help drive the ship forward with express entry. When you click speak to a lawyer, you have an opportunity to connect with us. Once we connect with you, we can identify, issues that you probably never even thought of. And then from there, we transition to you retaining us to help you with your applications. The About Us section talks about our approach and how we do not use assistants or paralegals. When you retain us, you work directly with Alicia, myself, and Igor. It's direct lawyer to client collaboration. And we work through everything all the way up to the point of uploading your documents with you. And we use Zoom as our screen sharing tool, and we work as if we're right there beside you. And we would never, like, we've talked about this at length within the firm, and there's a lot of different ways to run practices. You could have a stable full of paralegals that are working for you or assistants that you've trained, but neither I nor Alicia nor Igor want to sacrifice the good night's sleep we have at night because we know that we were the ones that worked directly with you. And our knowledge, coupled with your sincere desire to get things right, just like us, is what makes all the difference. So we wouldn't trade it. And we absolutely love working for you. I know I talk about the course a lot because I know, for some people, it's literally the difference between paying for their groceries or deciding whether or not to retain us. And that is why we created the course. Hands down, we would much rather have you retain us and let us walk through the process with you versus you wading through these uncertain waters on your own. But the course is there as a backup so that we can just help more of you. Now, I'll finish off with just one last little comment. And I'm going to tell you, Mishiko, right here, she says, just curious, is there like a whistleblower line if you know someone doing misrepresentation regarding work experience? Absolutely, there is. And I'm going to share my screen. It's the IRCC website, how to report fraud or abuse. and it gives you a number of different scenarios that you can describe here. So you're an international student, you get a suspicious phone, you think your visa is fake, you think someone is possibly a victim of human trafficking, you think someone has committed immigration fraud. That would be one of the factors, okay? And then there's a Canada Border Service Agency, a Border Watch toll-free line right here. And then you can also report the fraud online using the CBSA's secure website. And but there's sections for a variety of different situations. Reporting fraud if you're outside Canada, even if you think someone is creating fake documents to get into Canada. These are all options that are available for you. And if you go to the chat, you'll see that I actually dropped this little link in here, which is the link to the fraud tip line. Okay. Tom says here on a separate note, the accelerator is really awesome. Well worth the money. I'll give you an applause. Thanks, Tom. Because most people that are watching this is like, Mark, why are you still pushing your course? Who cares about your course? Everything's free online. Well, there you go. And Kibbutz says, how much is the course? The course itself, like I said before, is $347 US. And it's housed kind of through a US platform. And so US dollars is what the course is. And one thing for me, when people retain me after using the course, because you come, you attend the classes, you learn. If you then decide after purchasing the course that there's too many issues in your application and you do want to retain us, I always refund the course fee for you when you retain us. So keep that in mind as you go forward. And I think, Alicia, we have covered a very, very long one today. We've really encroached into our staff meeting, which is becoming somewhat of a pattern lately. But we love doing this. We love doing what we can to try to help you. And we're so grateful for all of the time that you guys spend with us sitting watching this. And we'd encourage you, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you subscribe to our Canadian Immigration Podcast. All of this can actually be found on our website or in the link in the description here. But when you go to our website here, you'll see the top menu bar. We have blog and resources where you can access everything. Our blog, the YouTube channel, our newsletter. We've started a new little section called Successful Cases We Worked. Express Entry Accelerator access is here. The temporary resident visa course we also have is here. And then, of course, subscribe on Apple Podcast or Spotify for our podcast. So all of that is available, and we hope that these efforts we're giving to share, if you do choose to retain some, that you'll think of us or you'll refer us to someone else. So thanks so much. And this is Alicia and Mark signing off here. There we go. Take care, guys.